They said the sea never spoke to him, not because it didn't want to, but because little Koa had no ears to hear it. Born deaf in a fisherman's village where everything depended on the tides, he grew up watching mouths move without sound, waves crash without song, and drums beat in festivals that felt like wind brushing past skin, but never settling in the chest. He never complained. He simply carved. At age 7, he stole a broken oar from the docks and started scratching into it with a sharpened nail. At 10, he was already carving fish bones into swirling spirals that matched the tide charts. By 12, his mother found an entire cupboard drawer full of patterns, waves, nets, fishermen dancing, all mapped in rhythm. But there was no audience, just silence and sawdust. One day, while repairing nets near the beach, Koa found a washed-up tree trunk, charred black, heavy, still breathing with salt. While others saw driftwood, he saw a challenge. He dragged it home alone. Took 2 days, tore his hands, didn't sleep. Then he began. No sketches, no plan, just feeling. For weeks, the hammer and chisel became his only voice. Neighbors started noticing, not the boy, but the sound. The way he struck the wood had a pulse, like drumming without noise, like music you didn't hear, but felt. An American tourist, a retired jazz drummer named Mike, happened to pass through on a photo tour. He heard it, not with his ears, but in his bones. He followed the vibration to the back of a shack where he found Koa, shirtless and focused, carving a spiral wave into the charred wood. Mike didn't speak Vietnamese. Koa didn't speak at all, but somehow they understood each other. Mike pointed at the carving, then at his heart. Koa nodded and smiled. For the first time, someone had heard him. Later, Mike brought a friend, a musician who dabbled in sculpting, then a gallery owner, then a reporter. Soon, Koa's carvings weren't just wooden objects. They were rhythms, solid music. And he wasn't just a boy with silence. He was the boy who gave wood a voice. If this began and moves you, if you believe that art can speak even when the artist cannot, then this story is for you. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and follow the journey of Koa, a deaf carver from coastal Vietnam whose hands speak louder than sound. Because sometimes silence isn't empty, it's listening. The piece was simple, just under 4 feet tall. Driftwood smoothed by salt, darkened by time, carved into a swirling wave with fish arcing through it. Their fins etched in thin, vibrating lines, as if swimming through invisible sound. Koa named it Bien Calm, the Silent Sea. He never told anyone why, but Mike, the American drummer, knew. He arranged for it to be displayed at a small coastal art fair in Hoi An. Not a flashy event, more of a gathering for curious artists, retired backpackers, and Vietnamese sculptors passing through. That's where they met him. Trinh Quang, a blind jazz pianist from Saigon. He wasn't famous, but among musicians, he was a legend. Lost his sight at 19, played by feel, composed music based on wind, warmth, and weight. Mike introduced him to the piece. Trinh touched it carefully. First, the wave, then the fish, then the sharp point near the base, a lightning bolt half hidden under a carved moon. He stood still for a long time, then asked, through a translator, "Who carved this?" Koa stepped forward. Trinh reached out, found his hand, pressed his palm gently. "I don't see you," he said, "but I just heard you." Koa didn't cry. He never did. But his mother, standing nearby, covered her mouth. Trinh spent over an hour with the piece. He didn't just touch it. He played it. letting his fingers flow like on piano keys, tracing each movement as if it were a score written in wood grain. "There's a melody here," he whispered. Not written, not sung, but felt. The wave builds, the fish scatter, then it all drops, like silence. He later performed a new piece on the final night of the fair. No sheet music, no explanation, just him at the keyboard, eyes closed, hands moving like he was carving the air. When the final note faded, no one clapped. They just sat, silent, listening to what still lingered. That night, someone posted a video of Trin's performance and tagged Koa's sculpture in the caption. "This isn't just wood. This is rhythm in form. This is the boy who carved music." By morning, the video had gone semi-viral. Nothing flashy, just one frame. The sculpture. Caption: "He can't hear, but somehow we all do." If this chapter speaks to you, if you believe art can travel from hand to heart without sound or sight, then let this journey continue with you. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and follow how Koa's hands are teaching the world to listen differently. Because some music isn't heard through ears. It's carved into being. The invitation came in an envelope with gold trim, a private gallery in Saigon. Minimalist, sleek, air-conditioned like a bank. They called his work visceral raw, post-silence. Koa didn't know what that meant, but his mother cried when she read the name of the city. She'd never imagined her boy, born without sound, would ever go there as an artist. They gave him a room. White walls, perfect lighting, polished wood floors. His sculptures stood like quiet witnesses. Bien Calm took center stage. Next to it, his new work, a swirling knot of driftwood and copper nails called Heartbeat Without Drum. Opening night was full of wine glasses, heels on wood, whispers in English and Vietnamese. Koa stood in the corner, suit too tight, hands trembling. He wasn't afraid. He just didn't know what they wanted. Then came the first question. A man in a gray vest, art dealer from Europe. "Could you explain the metaphor in the fish? Is it symbolic of isolation, perhaps?" Koa didn't respond. Mike stepped in, trying to bridge the silence, but the man persisted. Or perhaps the spiral represents a kind of sonic grief. Koa just looked at him, and then walked away to the sculpture, to his voice. He knelt, pulled something from his pocket, a small mallet and chisel, and with every eye watching, he began carving, right there, in the gallery, in front of everyone. Not wildly, not rebelliously, but carefully. He added one more wave, just beneath the last fish, a tiny one, facing the opposite direction, breaking the rhythm. When he was done, he stood, walked to the man, took his hand, guided it to the sculpture, and let him feel the change. The man froze. "You added the answer," he whispered. Koa nodded. No words, no noise, but no one questioned the meaning again. From that night on, his pieces weren't labeled with text panels, just a hand symbol, inviting you to touch, because Koa had made his point. Some meanings are not explained. They are experienced. If you've ever stood in front of art and felt something without knowing why, this story is yours. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and follow Koa's journey as he teaches the world that not all silence is absence. Sometimes, silence is the loudest truth. He didn't look like a tourist. Sun-wrinkled skin, eyes always scanning, hands that never stayed still, except when they gripped the dog tag around his neck. His name was David, 71, Vietnam vet. Came back not as soldier, but as man trying to forgive the ghosts. He wandered into the Saigon gallery by accident, looking for water, found silence. At first, He almost left. Didn't want to feel. Didn't want to remember. But there in the corner was Koa's newest work. A slab of smooth driftwood split open like a scar. On one side, carved ocean waves. On the other, mountain ridges. And between them, a pair of hands, open, but not touching. It was called The Distance Between Us. David stared. Didn't read the label. Didn't need to. He walked up, eyes damp, fingers shaking, and slowly reached out. Touched the wood. It was warm, alive, breathing with the kind of ache that doesn't scream, but lingers. Koa watched from across the room. He didn't move, didn't speak. He never had to. David stayed like that for 20 minutes. No one interrupted. When he turned around, he walked straight to Koa. No translator, no introduction, just this. I've had nightmares for 40 years. Koa listened. I couldn't sleep through a single night without waking up in sweat. Until yesterday. Pause. Last night, I touched this piece in my dreams. He swallowed. I didn't wake up screaming. They stood in silence. Then Koa pulled out a small block of cedar from his bag. Carved quickly. No polish, no base. Just two hands. This time, touching. He handed it to David. Not as a gift, as permission. David didn't say thank you. He just held it to his chest and nodded. Sometimes, healing doesn't sound like medicine. It sounds like nothing. And yet, everything. If you believe the wood can hold more than shape, that it can carry memory, grief, and peace, then Koa's journey isn't just a story. It's a sanctuary. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where each carving isn't decoration. It's a doorway. The invitation came from Berlin, a festival called Voices of Silence, celebrating artists who express themselves without words. Dancers, mime performers, installation artists, and one Vietnamese woodcarver. Koa had never been on a plane, never left Vietnam, never felt snow. They didn't ask how they found him. He just packed his tools, his cedar block, and two small sculptures wrapped in cloth. On the night of the performance, the theater was packed. Rows of artists, curators, critics. No translator, no subtitles, just the name on the screen. KHOA, woodcarver, Vietnam. He walked onto the black stage under a single white light. No podium, no chair, no speech, just him and a long wooden table. He placed the cloth down, unwrapped the first sculpture. It was called Breath of Bamboo. A single flute, carved from teak, cracked open, its center swirling with delicate ridges like a fingerprint. The second sculpture was a pair of lungs, not anatomical, but imagined. Each lobe shaped from different woods, one light, one dark. They almost touched, but he didn't explain. He just nodded and stepped back. Then, he did something no one expected. He walked off stage and left the sculptures behind. Silence, longer than most audiences could bear. Then, the light dimmed, and from the ceiling a hidden microphone began to pick up something. Not voice, not music, but the sound of air moving through the flute sculpture. Barely audible, but rhythmic, like someone breathing. The audience leaned in. They weren't watching anymore. They were listening. To wood, to a flute that couldn't play, to lungs that couldn't sing. But together they whispered, even without air, we remember breath. When the lights came up, Koa returned. He bowed, not once, but 3 times. The crowd stood, not cheering, not shouting, just standing, hands over hearts, tears in some eyes, because they had heard something, not through ears, but through presence. Later that night, a music blogger wrote, I've never cried at silence, but tonight I wept for a flute that never played. If you've ever felt that the deepest art isn't performed, it's shared, then this journey continues with you. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and witness how a man with no words is teaching the world a new language. One carved breath at a time. He came back quietly. No cameras, no fanfare, no one waiting at the airport. Just the Mekong, wide and slow, cradling the edges of his village like it always had. His mother hadn't changed much, still wrapped fish with banana leaves, still sat on the wooden porch as the sun dipped into the mangroves. She saw him coming from afar, a little taller, a little thinner, with hands more calloused than ever. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry. She just opened her arms, and Koa stepped in. That night, the house smelled of dried shrimp and smoke. Neighbors passed by, nodding. No one asked where he'd been. They just looked at his hands and knew something had returned. In the morning, Koa walked to the old mango tree by the riverbank, the one where he first carved a fish into a paddle at age 7. He sat, pulled out a block of wood from his satchel. Not imported, not rare. Just a piece of local jackfruit. Knotted, cracked, perfect. He carved without plan. The wood was soft. The breeze was warm. The birds called like distant bells. By dusk, it was done. A small sculpture. A mother's hands, washing a boy's feet. He placed it on the altar beside a faded photo of his father. His mother found it that evening. She touched the wood slowly, didn't say anything. But later that night, Koa heard her singing in the kitchen. Off-key, software but singing. And somehow, he felt it. News came a week later. A European collector wanted to buy The Distance Between Us, offered enough money to rebuild the entire village pier. Koa declined. He donated it to a children's therapy center for war survivors in Cambodia. Because some carvings don't belong in glass cases. They belong in hands. If this story moved you, if you believe that the truest art isn't what you take home, but what sends you home, then subscribe to Wood Carving Artist. Because in every journey we share, there's always a river waiting to carry us back. They didn't call it a school. Koa wouldn't have liked that. He hated titles, didn't care for signs, didn't want a plaque on the wall. But they came anyway. 3 boys from the mountains, a girl with a burn scar across her face, a teenager who hadn't spoken in 2 years after his brother drowned. They came carrying wood, not fine lumber, not tools, just chunks of old chairs, broken crates, driftwood from storms. They came because someone told them, there's a man who doesn't talk, but his carvings understand. Koa didn't teach in words. He didn't stand at the front. He sat beside them, picked up a block, tapped once, listened to the grain, chiseled slowly, followed the breath of the wood. No speeches, just rhythm. At first, their hands fumbled. Too hard, too soft, too fast. But he didn't correct, he just carved beside them. Let the sound of the blade speak for itself. Weeks passed. Then one day, the silent boy carved something new. A hand reaching up from water, not drowning, but asking to be held. He placed it on Koa's table. Koa looked at it, then at him, then nodded once, slowly. And that boy smiled, just a little. The next month, more kids came. Then a war amputee. Then a former street artist from Hanoi who lost his sight to chemicals. They sat in circles. No hierarchy, no tuition, just wood and silence. Mike returned, gray now but still grinning. He brought a documentary crew. They asked, what do you call this place? Koa carved 3 words onto a cedar board. Lang, Cham, Song. Listen, Carve. Live. That became the name. Not a school, not a temple, but something between. Tourists started coming, but Koa kept them outside the circle. This is not a show, Mike explained to one couple. This is healing. If you believe that art is not passed down in words, but in witnessing, if you believe a hand placed on a chisel beside another is a kind of prayer, then this is not the end of the story. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and follow how silence, when shared, becomes a symphony of renewal. Because sometimes, the most powerful voices are the ones we learn to echo. It started as a single block, thick, heavy, from an old jackfruit tree struck by lightning. It had stood near Koa's childhood home for decades. His mother said it saved their roof from the storm. He'd kept the piece ever since. Now, he brought it out. Not to display, not to sell, but to carve and bury. The children asked why. He didn't answer. Instead, he started carving, day by day. No plan, no sketch, just hands on wood. Grain revealing shape, edges becoming memory. It took a month. The piece was unlike anything he'd ever made. Not a figure, not a wave, not even a story. It was a tree, twisted, rising, with hundreds of tiny fingerprints etched into the bark. No two the same, each one carved from the actual prints of his students, pressed into clay, transferred to wood, preserved in silence. He called it Kan Rungim, the silent forest. On the morning of his 30th birthday, he gathered them all, from the mountains, from the rivers, from Saigon. Each student stood barefoot in a circle. Koa placed the sculpture in the center. Then he dug. No grand speech, no ritual, just the sound of earth accepting wood. He lowered the piece into the hole, covered it gently, and placed a small carved seed on top. What will grow? One girl asked. He smiled and tapped his chest once. Whatever we carry forward. Years passed. The school grew. But Koa stepped back. More students became mentors. More carvings went to hospitals, refugee centers, burned churches, flooded homes. Everywhere hands had lost their place. Koa's art gave them ground. He never traveled again, but his name did, etched quietly behind each work, in memory of the forest inside the wood. If you followed this journey, thank you. If it touched you, if even one moment carved a space in your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where we share more than craft. We share humanity. And remember, some artists speak, some singing, but some, they listen to the grain and let the forest speak for them.